Welcome to Book Club Preview. I'm Michael, and today we're looking at What If, and the title is Orbital Submarine. How long could a nuclear submarine last in orbit? And man, that's actually a really great question. I love this one. And the short answer is yeah. A nuclear submarine could last in orbit, and the submarine would do pretty well. Unfortunately, the crew of the submarine wouldn't do very well, and they would struggle with things like heat and oxygen, and of course, food and stuff like that. But for the submarine, it's pretty tight. So if water is not going to get inside of it when it's way down deep in the ocean, then air is probably not going to leak out of it when it's in outer space. But for the crew, a nuclear submarine, it takes oxygen out of the water so that crew can keep breathing. If they're in space, there's no water for the submarine to get the oxygen from, so they're only going to have a few days worth of air. Another problem is heat. And this is a really weird part. I didn't quite understand all of it. But in space, things get hotter because there's not as much stuff to take the heat away. Where in the ocean, for example, even though it's colder or it's not as cold, the water's pulling the heat away very easily. So in space, it's colder, but it's hotter, and our actual space area is really warm compared to a lot of space out there because we're so close to the sun, but it's still cold enough to where the heat coming off of the spaceship, man, oh my goodness, I'm starting to get confused here. Because we live in an atmosphere and there's air around us that's warm, our heat bounces off that warm air and comes back to us and kind of insulates us, keeps the heat together. But in space, even though it might be really warm, that warm bits of space are so far apart that it doesn't affect our heat. So the heat just goes and flies out. So space is cold and it's hot and it's cold, but it's hot, cold. Okay, crazy. Go to science class. He talks about getting a little bit more deeper. Even though those really small molecules are actually pretty hot comparatively, they're so small that they don't transfer enough heat to actually do something. And he gives an example of his dad grinding a piece of metal, and these little bits of metal are flying off in red embers. Beep, 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 beep. And they're hitting his clothes. Beep, 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 beep. And sometimes his skin. It's like, Dad, why aren't those things burning you? Well, it's because they're so small that one, by the time they hit the skin, it doesn't affect the skin because it's too small. But two, and he doesn't go into this, as it's flying through the air, it's so small that the heat is just going blasting off into the air. So by the time it touches you, it's actually not that hot. So all the little molecules and rays in space, very similar situation. So you'd have to keep the heat on in the submarine, and but you have to be careful not to get too hot because then everything would explode. Okay. So once you're in outer space, if you want to maintain the orbit, you'd have to slow down, and that really wouldn't be possible because the submarine doesn't have rockets. Oh wait, submarine does have rockets, but those rockets just blast off and shoot in the wrong direction. But if you turn those rockets upside down and you shot them, then yeah, they could push the submarine. So I guess they do have rockets. And if we had a lot of those rockets, we could maintain orbit or even end up slowing down and going back into the Earth's orbit. Orbit. I spelled that wrong there. Sorry. Going back into the Earth's orbit would probably kill you from one, slowing down and having all that problems of the going in one direction and suddenly being pushed in another direction. But if you were able to survive that, and if you jumped out of the submarine with a parachute, maybe you could live. But there's probably not very many parachutes on a submarine. And he does say, hey, when you do get into outer space and you do shoot those rockets to push you, remember to turn off the explosive part of the rocket so you don't explode into a million bits. That leaves us with some vocabulary. First one is conductive, the ability to move energy or heat or electricity. So copper or gold is very conductive. Electricity and heat can move along it very easily. Water too is very conductive. Convection, this is where if I have air, okay, this is cold air, this is hot air. Hot air is more spread out and more fast. Cold air is tighter together and more slow. So the process of the slow going to the fast and the fast going to the slow, we call convection. I don't know how to really pronounce this word, apricity. He actually defines it in the book. So I'm going to leave this one blank. I didn't know what this word is, but if you look at the footnote, he defines the word. So make sure you're reading carefully and reading all those points. So I would like you to tell me what apricity means. I had to look it up, and I had to look it up in the book, but he does say what it means. The fourth word here is ablative. Ablative is when a rocket is going into outer space, it becomes so hot from all of the air molecules going ping, 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 and that causing friction and energy that the metal actually starts to evaporate. And that is called ablative, when that metal or matter starts to heat up so much and get hit so much by other things that it actually starts to go into the air and melt, I guess, in a way, or evaporate. That leaves us with our discussion question, and I decided, hey, let's practice another would you rather. So in this question, it's would you rather go to outer space and see what it's like in outer space, or, so maybe go in a spaceship, sure, or maybe go in a submarine deep into the ocean? Which of those would you prefer? And of course, please make your own discussion question. That is all the time that we have for today. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Book Club Preview. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.